My background is that I'm a midwife. I've been an independent midwife, and I now teach midwifery at the University of Hertfordshire. And I'm in the fourth year of doing a doctorate, and I'm looking at the experience of pregnant women through our prison system. And today we're lucky to have joining us Naomi and Denise from Birth Companions, who I have been so fortunate to be able to train with them as a volunteer. So I'd like to start by thanking them for joining us today. So what I really want to do is to be able to sort of walk you through a woman's journey through the prison system. And I'm going to start by giving a little bit of background to the sorts of situations that women find themselves in, and hopefully bring to life a little bit about the reality of what it is like to be pregnant and in prison. So starting with what we do know about our women in prison situation at the moment, we have around 4,000 women in prison at this moment, and we know that about 6 to 7% of the population are pregnant. It's kind of a fluid figure because often women go in and out of the prison system. It's a little bit of a revolving door situation, so we don't have really accurate figures. Many of these women actually discover that they're pregnant on admission to prison with initial health checks that they have. What I found staggering when I started to look at the research and the evidence behind women who enter into the prison system is the stories and the backgrounds and the trauma that they may have suffered in their lives prior to ending up in prison. And what we do know factually is that around half of the women that end up in prison are actually victims of domestic violence themselves, so they're victims as well as ending up in the criminal justice system. And a staggering 30% of these women report having suffered some form of trauma or sexual abuse in childhood. And not surprisingly, many of these women end up addicted to drugs, illicit substances and alcohol. And around a quarter of these women through their life situation end up with no permanent address. So a lot of the women are homeless, almost a quarter. And again, thinking about the background of these women, it's not surprising that around 80% are suffering from some form of mental health illness of sort of varying degrees, and many of them are on prescription medication. And what's also really shocking is the women, for the women and for the children. We know that around 18,000 children are affected by their mothers being in prison each year, and that's a staggering number of children. So that's what we do know. And when I started looking at the literature and looking around, I figured out that we actually don't know very much about pregnant women in prison. There's very little qualitative research done, very little research into women's voices and women's stories, and we don't know very much about their experience of being in prison. So what I wanted to sort of bring to life today is a little bit about what actually does happen, so the woman's journey through the prison system. And some of my emerging findings, I'm in the middle of field work at the moment, so some of the sorts of findings that are coming up and trying to bring to life some of the women's voices. That this is a very invisible group of women, so I really want to find the women's voices through this presentation as well. So thinking about the woman's journey, as I said, many women find out that they're pregnant when they enter prison, and what we do know is that most women do feel shocked, and often finding out they're pregnant, it's quite a shock for them as well. So women, as they find out they're entering the prison system and they're finding out that they're pregnant, and this is a voice of one of the women who has kindly spoken to me about what it was like going into prison. And she said to me that it was a shock. It was a shock, and I was thinking, I've got a baby inside me and I'm not going to be free until my baby is home and holding my hand and walking next to me now. When you're faced with that at 21 and you've not been through anything bad really in life, it's a lot to take on. And many of the women have shared similar sorts of experiences when they entered prison. It's a scary place to go into, and especially many of the women, when they do go in, are fairly young. It's often their first offence, and actually entering in and then finding out that you're pregnant, it's sort of a bit of a double whammy, really. Women also talk about the fact that they don't quite know what's going to happen. It's hard if you're faced with pregnancy anyway. You've got lots of questions, but actually when you're in prison, it's very difficult because you don't know what the system is and you don't know necessarily what is going to happen. And women have talked about the worries and the stress that that's caused them. What's emerging from some of my research that I've been doing is sort of both negative and positive. For some women, if we look back to the facts and the figures, the facts that some women are substance misusers, some women are homeless, it can actually be a positive place going into prison. It can be a place of safety. And for women who are suffering from violent relationships at home, it can actually be a safe place, somewhere where there's a routine, somewhere where you may have services in place. And that's something that's come out, which kind of I didn't expect initially. But what has come out as well is the unwanted attention from other women. It's very difficult when you're pregnant and you're very visible when you're pregnant. And in prison, often you want to feel quite invisible. So it's not something that you can hide very easily, and women have talked about the fact that they may have unwanted attention from other women in prison, and that can be quite a difficult situation for a woman to be in. The stress that women talk about is quite huge, actually, and it's from my research going into the prison system, it's a stressful environment, and I know the work that birth companions do, the feeling of tension can be quite high, and we know that stress can really affect a pregnant woman and the unborn baby, and we know that there's emerging evidence from that's coming out as well. But women have talked about the stress that they feel, and something that comes up a lot with women talking about issues of food and feeling hungry, and this is not just the finding that I've been finding through my research, but it's findings that birth companions have talked about as well, of feeling hungry. It's very difficult when you are having cravings or when there are set meal times and you can't necessarily eat when you're hungry, you can't necessarily satisfy your cravings, and it can be quite difficult if you're feeling quite sick. And that's another thing that women will talk about, the fact that you can't necessarily get the right fitting clothes, right fitting maternity clothes for women, and that's really quite difficult. And a lot of the things that are coming up for me with the fear and anxiety and the blocking of emotions are, I'm putting sort of the word to it as a sort of denial of pregnancy sensations, and feeling this anxiety of thinking about whether or not you're going to be keeping your baby with you is something that women will talk about. For example, a woman said to me, sometimes I'll lie in my bed and I'll be crying my eyes out and thinking, oh, I'm not going to know him. And then he'll start kicking and it's like he's saying, you do know me. And I think that's quite a powerful feeling, that women are having to suppress some of their emotions for their unborn babies, especially when we think of 1,001 critical days and how important that bonding process is. Another thing with pregnancy sensations, there's even things like going to the toilet. So a woman said to me, there was a pregnant girl in my class and she was desperate for the toilet and she was told no, and said, but I'm pregnant, I really need to go. And the woman said, tough, I don't care, you can wait till you're released. So it's those sorts of issues that are coming up for women. But also women are talking about the fact there are positives, there are kind gestures, staff can be very caring, they get support from the staff, and especially social relationships with other women. Women in prison find that particularly supportive. So that's quite important. Birth companions are an incredible organisation who support women and run pregnancy groups, and also will go with women into hospital. So that's quite an important part of Birth Companions' work, as in supporting women in the antenatal period through the labour and birth as a birth supporter, and in the postnatal period as well, supporting women whether or not they're being separated from their babies. It can also be an opportunity for change. So women are very receptive to becoming healthy when they're pregnant. So when women do go into prison, they might find that they want to really change and change for the better to become, as they become a mum. And that's something that we found, and especially Birth Companions, many of the women who have been supported by Birth Companions have talked about that opportunity for change being a very powerful force, becoming pregnant, becoming a mother. And as I've said, it can be a safe place for women. So we're going back again to the feeling of anxiety that women will talk about. This is something a woman has said to me, that there are girls going in and out and they want to touch your bump, and you can't say to them, can you not do that, please? And I think it's something that we've kind of taken for granted as women, being able to have a protective bubble around ourselves when we're pregnant. But I think it makes women feel incredibly vulnerable when they're pregnant and in prison. And that can be a very difficult situation for a woman to feel as well. Humiliation and shame is a theme that's coming up through my research, and particularly when moving into the hospital situation. So women who are going from the prison to a hospital appointment will talk about how they may have felt going on that visit, and especially if they are in handcuffs. And this is something that has been a recurring theme when I've been talking to women about that feeling of shame and feeling of humiliation when people, the public, have been looking at them and staring, and it's been a very difficult situation for many women. And this is a woman who said to me, I carry big babies and I was ready to drop and I was in handcuffs, and that is the most degraded I've ever felt, the most degrading. And that was even worse than being sentenced. And I think the words degradation, women use the word embarrassed, ashamed. And I think that's something that we as midwives really need to be very aware of as well when we're working with women who may be in prison. I've talked a little bit about anticipating separation, and this is a big fear for women who are in prison, especially you go in, you find out you're pregnant and you don't know what the system is, you don't know what's potentially going to happen. And this is a really big thing that makes women feel incredibly stressed, incredibly worried. They often don't find out that they've got a place on the mother and baby unit until quite late on into their pregnancy, and it can feel very uncomfortable and a very difficult time for many women when they're pregnant. And this is a woman who shared with me, even though you're pregnant and your baby's kicking and you can't wait to see it, it's also the biggest fear in your mind. It's already happened to me twice. I've given birth, they've come into the hospital and they've said, you're not going home with this baby. And to have that feeling of fear and not understanding and not knowing what's going to happen can have a really big impact on the pregnancy and the stress for that unborn baby as well. Feeling watched and controlled is something that women have talked about while they've been in labour. And women, when they go into hospital to have their babies, they usually have 2 prison officers with them. Often they can choose who comes with them. There's often a rota of prison officers who can come along with them, and they often get to choose. However, it's the feeling of being watched that women have said, and many women have actually said, well, it's not surprising I ended up with a cesarean section, and that's something that's come up quite a lot when I've talked to women. And this is a quote from somebody who spoke to me, and she said, I just felt like I was being watched and like they're in uniform, and it feels like they have some form of control over you. So you can't express yourself in a normal way. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like a dog on a lead. You've only got so much more before they're pulling you back. It's like they're my keepers. And I didn't want to turn around and say to my keeper, oh, can I get off my bed and go on a birthing wall? I think that's really powerful. There's not much more I can say about how that woman expressed her feeling there, but it's a very powerful image that she creates for me. And this is somebody who'd been through the prison system but remembers it like yesterday. I think this picture on this slide really sort of depicts the absolute joy of giving birth, holding your baby for the first time, and feeling that surge of love that many women explain and tell us that they feel. And it's interesting that when you, especially when you talk to women when they're having their first baby, and they're talking about that bonding and the fact that it's something they haven't experienced before. And they talk about, and often women will say that before they've given birth, that they want to hand their baby out to somebody because they don't want their baby to be in the prison system. However, it's when they first hold their baby in their arms, and this is a woman who said to me, because I've never had a child and that bond with a child before, I didn't really know how strong the bond would be. And when you have that and you're breastfeeding, you can't break that bond. And what's come out with of the work of birth companions, especially, is the incredible support that they're given, the women are given for being able to feed and breastfeed their babies and bond with their babies. And many women will go on and breastfeed for many months, and it's quite and talk about how that bond was something very special for them while they were in prison with their babies. And this is the same woman who talked about the fact that she might consider giving her baby out to a family member to look after. But she said to me, as soon as I had her and I put her on my breast, I didn't tell anyone, but I thought, it's not nice. It's not nice in here for her. It's not good for her in here. But as soon as I fed, it's different, isn't it? And I think, again, she really depicts that feeling of bonding, and the fact that as midwives, as students, as midwifery support workers, we need to be able to support this bonding and this attachment with mothers and babies wherever they may be having their babies. This is something as well that kind of surprised me, but when I've been talking to women, it kind of doesn't surprise me working with these women, is a lot of women are very fearful when they're going out of the prison. Most of us sort of imagine that people count down the days and have this image in our heads where people can't wait to get out. But if you've got a newborn baby or a young child, it's actually very scary for some women. And women talked about the fact that there's often more anxiety on that day than the whole sentence. And women can, if they're renting a property, they may have lost their tenancy, and it can be very bewildering going out into society with a new baby if you've been incarcerated. There's a lot of fears around probation and going for probation visits, and there's a lot of pressure on women going to these visits, and they're scared who will be there, therefore they might have to find somebody to look after their baby. So that's quite stressful as well. So something else that women fear, and it's something that we need to be really mindful of when we're supporting women. And this is somebody who said to me how it feels post-release, even many years post-release. She said it's like a dark cloud and it's still there, and it takes a while to shift. And this goes back again to the feeling of sort of humiliation and shame, and the fact that women will often find that it's hard to shake off, it's hard to go, it's quite difficult to shake off that dark cloud that hangs over women. I thought it's when talking to everybody about midwives and staff within the hospitals and thinking about the stigma and the humiliation from earlier slides, and I've got a couple of quotes here from women who've talked about their care when they've gone into hospital to have their babies, and this is somebody who said that she felt quite judged and quite a lot of stigma, and she said, I think I believe it was because they knew I was from prison. They weren't very nice at all. And whether that's her perception or whether it was reality, it's still so important, the fact that she felt that she was being judged by staff. And I think we really need to be mindful that the judging is not our role there when we're supporting women coming from the prison into our hospitals. However, this is another experience from a woman that I've interviewed, and she spoke so highly of the staff, and they were so that it was. She told me how everyone sort of bent over backwards for her. And she felt really valued by that experience, and really remembers it as something positive. And she said to me, the midwives genuinely cared about me and didn't judge me. I was taken care of very well and wasn't judged in the hospital, and had the most amazing experience. And that's what we want to hear from every woman that we care for. But it was really lovely to hear this from Becky, not her real name, that's how she felt about her experience going into the hospital. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about our role, and going back again to the facts and the figures about women. We need to always remember that she may be a victim. So thinking about, the Royal College of Midwives have written a position paper for childbearing women in prison. The first one, I believe, is 2006, and a more recent one in 2014. And I'll come to that slide in a minute. But we need to think about our 6 C's. And I know it's kind of a buzzword for all of us at the moment, but it's really important to remember to share compassion for women who have been, who are coming in from the prison, who may have been in our prison system, and think about the fact that she has already been judged. She's gone through that process. It is not our role to continue that judging process. It doesn't matter from our perspective. We need to care for her with a non-judgmental approach, but also to be courageous enough to be able to be her advocate. And thinking about the fact that most women who are in our prison systems are there for short sentences for non-violent crimes, and regardless of what she may have done, we need to just remember to be able to be as compassionate as possible. And something that birth companions do very, very well is practice a trauma-informed approach, and there's more written about this, and this is becoming quite an important sort of piece of evidence for us to work from, thinking about the fact that many women are survivors of abuse themselves, and being able to sort of not reenact that abuse, and think about how we can adopt universal precautions and practice a way where we are trauma informed, and consider that for all these women that we may care for. Thinking again about handcuffs and thinking about our role as her advocate, there are no place for handcuffs, and we cannot handcuff women, women handcuffed in labour. However, women still report that they are sometimes being handcuffed from as they come into the maternity unit, and we really need to be able to be courageous enough and ask whether they are truly necessary to be on, and remember that we are with women rather than with the prison officers, so we can challenge, and we can be her advocate, and we can find out whether they really are necessary. I mentioned the position statement from the RCM, and I thought it'd be good to pop this up here for you and say what the RCM view is about handcuffs. And the RCM strongly reiterates its position that handcuffs or other restraints should not be used during any medical or midwifery consultation, examination, or during intimate times such as breastfeeding. The RCM believes that the onus of responsibility for ensuring that women are not handcuffed during these times rests with the midwife, who should ask for all restraints to be removed by the attending officer. And I think it's important that we remind ourselves of that, and the RCM position on this, and the fact that it's important that we are courageous enough to be able to stand with the woman on this one. And thinking again about our role, we have we take it for granted that women come in usually with a pregnancy bag. However, when a woman is coming from a prison, this bag may not necessarily appear with her. It may be in a special centre, it's been security checked. So we need to think about maybe having in our hospitals something for women on standby, even for those women who don't necessarily have access to things even as simple as sanitary protection and maternity pads and breast pads. Think about having something that we can be able to help these women with, remembering that we are with the woman first. And women have said to me, and they've said to birth companions sometimes, that often the midwife or the health support worker or doctor may speak to the prison officer first, and it's important that we always remember that the woman is the centre of our care, so we can be an advocate for her and ensure that she has the basics. It's often not straightforward to even get the basics in the prison system, so I think there's a role for us to ensure that she does get these basics, and thinking about ways that we can equip ourselves to be able to be her advocate. And one of my suggestions would be that we could say something like, we need to undertake an intimate examination, would you mind waiting outside? And it doesn't really matter whether that intimate examination is taking a blood pressure or a temperature or a vaginal examination. It's every examination, if we're thinking of a trauma-informed approach, could potentially be an intimate examination. So thinking of the 6 C's for the incarcerated childbearing woman, thinking about compassion. She's had her liberty taken away, that's her punishment. So we are there to offer our compassion and care for her as with any other woman. We're not there to judge her life trajectory and the choices that she's made, and courage to be her advocate, communicating with her sensitively, and always ask for consent, thinking that she may be a victim too, and remembering that it is still her choice. It's always still her choice. So the exciting news that Rachel talked to us about at the beginning, and this is where we will be able to talk more to Naomi and Denise about, is the fact that birth companions have written a birth charter for pregnant women in the prison system. And this is going to launch on the 26th of May 2016. So put that date in your diaries. There's going to be a lot of publicity about this. It's written by birth companions, and it's written with service users and supported by the Royal College of Midwives, and also with guidance from UNICEF, UK Baby Friendly Initiative. So it's a powerful document. It offers guidance backed by evidence and research findings, and at the moment in our prison system we don't have a prison service order for women in care, for women who are pregnant. So we're hoping that it's going to form the basis of a prison service order for this group of women, and to help the prison service be able to provide consistency amongst the prison estate. And there are some very, very good examples of practices within some prisons, but we want to see consistency throughout the prison system. And you can find birth companions on the websites below there, which is birthcompanions.org.uk, and it will be, if you want to go onto the website, you can order your own birth charter as well to be sent in time for the launch too. And here's you can't really see much of it here, but it's a beautifully produced document, and it's very clear and very easy to read. And I would suggest that you become familiar with it, because I think it's going to become quite a useful tool for all of us working with pregnant women in prison. Now, this is a very powerful quote, and before we sort of move on to questions with Denise and Naomi, I think this sort of epitomises the strength of women, and the women, some of the women that we worked with who have, through real adversity and really difficult life trajectory, have been able to change their lives and become the types of mothers that they've really wanted to become. And this is a woman who spoke to me, and as I listened to her transcript again a number of times, this really jumped out at me. And she said, I can't believe I did it. I don't know how I coped. I don't know how I did it as a woman, but as a woman I did. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And it made, when I picked this out of the hours of interview that she'd spoken with me, it really made the hairs on my arms stand up, because she really showed her strength and empowerment through that quote. So I'm still in the middle of collecting data, but I really do feel very privileged and very grateful to the women who are sharing their stories with me. It's very personal, very intimate, and it's very courageous to be able to share their experiences of a very dark time in their lives, and whilst this and some women that are still going through this very dark time in their lives too. What I've popped up here as well is again, it would be really great if you can follow, if you do follow Twitter, to follow Birth Companions, because you'll see lots of news about the birth charter coming up there if you're interested. My Twitter is @midwifeteacher if you want to follow me as well. So I will draw to a close this presentation.